This is a graphical comparison of Blade Runner Enhanced Edition from Nightdive. I've recorded a bunch of footage from the original game and I'm going to compare that to the Enhanced Edition to see what has changed. To really notice the difference, you do have to pretty much watch this footage back to back, because if you hadn't played this game for a really long time, it would probably be hard to spot what has actually changed, and it's not until you compare the footage that it's clear to see. To summarise, the most dramatic change you get is the smoothing out of the pixelated look, and the footage is now at 60 frames per second, which does make a difference in certain parts, especially when there's motion involved. Other changes in the game include things like we now have a title screen, we can now change the player personality right at the start before you even load up. The Kaya system has been completely overhauled and we have a nice HD Kaya system now for our menu. I'll just compare that quickly with the old Kaya system. You can tell that the older version is much more pixelated, and the older version had two different menus you had to switch between, but essentially that second menu was just doing the same thing as the new main menu in the enhanced version has now. But I'm sure people who clicked on this video don't really care about the menus or text or anything like that. So I'm going to jump right into the first comparison where I really noticed the 60 frames per second, and that was in McCoy's apartment. Whenever you land on the roof, it was very instantly noticeable to me that the frames per second were much higher whenever the spinner lands. And if I flick between the footage, you can see that the pixelation has been smoothed out, and even the smoke I think looks a little bit nicer, and you'll notice that the border at the side has been added, so we don't just have black bars to look at. Next up, let's go to another part where I noticed the 60 frames per second, and that was the arcade. We have lots of motion here. We have the moon bus spinning around, and we have the actual games on the screens being played. Even they look a lot sharper and nicer. I'm actually surprised they were able to get those to be up-resed and improve their frames per second, because the original footage for some of these games are very janky and very low res, of course, because they're a small tiny screen, but they did quite well to actually up-res this stuff. Another part of the game I really like is Anemoid Row. I spoke about this in my review where I love the neon signs. They look really nice and crisp, and the pixelation in the streets is all but gone. It's like quite smooth, and I think here definitely is a major improvement in the enhanced version. You really do have to flick between the footage here just to get a good appreciation of what has actually changed, and I could see people who probably haven't played this game for 5 or 10 years not seeing what has changed because it's been so long since they've played it. And it's just not until you actually compare the two things that you actually see what the improvements are. Another part of the enhanced version I really liked was the comedy club. The enhanced version just really cleans up those noisy pixels and just makes everything just that little bit smoother. And these background characters just like really brings them to life with removing the pixels, and just kind of, I said this in my review, but just like tricks your mind into thinking that they're kind of higher quality than they actually are. So those are some examples of parts that I really liked. I'm now going to show you some parts where I think the enhanced version doesn't work quite as well. One of them being the warehouse. The enhanced version smooths everything out just like it does with all the other scenes, but the problem with this section is that it smooths out the brick texture a little bit too much, and we now lose all the definition of the bricks. Also, the ground texture just loses all of its displacement. The original version has a nice bumpy ground, and the enhanced version just smooths that all out. The pipe loses all of its definition. You can no longer see the round edge to the pipe, and the graffiti on the walls just kind of smoothed out to the point where it can't really be read, and it almost becomes like an impressionistic painting where you just can't really tell what's what. In areas like this that are a little bit darker, I think it doesn't quite work as well. One other section of the game that's quite dark was the police station, and again I don't think the enhanced version works here very well. I was really looking forward to seeing what they would do with the police station, and unfortunately I just think it just doesn't work. There's more detail probably in the original PlayStation, and I just prefer it. There's a nice quality to this sort of blurriness and this impressionistic style that's interesting, but again, I just think the original just looks a little bit better because there's a little bit more detail. One other part where I think's kind of in between is in Chinatown. I love this part of the game. I love that it's in the movie, but I think the more I look at it, the more I'm sort of on the fence with this part as well, because as nice as it looks, if you look at the foreground in the original footage, again we get this nice bumpy displacement on the ground, but if I switch to the new version, it smooths out to the point where it just kind of looks like there's no real texture or something, and it just looks like a solid color of brown. And just, to me, again, I think the original ground looks a little bit nicer, and actually the shadow on the box in the foreground looks a little bit better in the original. So I don't know, there's parts of this image that work and parts of it that don't. Again, kind of on the fence on this one. Ending on a high note, let's go to the underground and this little train cart that goes overhead. In the enhanced version, the 60 frames per second here really shines. Again, pretty much anything with movement just looks so much better in the enhanced version. And I really genuinely never thought that this would be possible, because obviously Nightdive didn't have the original footage. And I always thought that you needed the original source footage to upscale something in 60 frames per second. I don't know how they've added these extra frames in there. I genuinely didn't know that was possible, but however they've done it, I'm really glad they did it, because it's one of the things that make this game look a little bit more modern, and also makes it hard to argue that this version isn't better than the original. And lastly, I'll focus on just one of the cutscenes in the game. The cutscenes have been cleaned up really nicely. I think they've probably spent some of the most time just cleaning these up. If we flick between the Rachel old and new, I'll just stop a frame and just flick between them. They've cleaned the pixelation way up. And if you look at things like the chair in the background, to me that just looks like a really high poly model, which it originally was, just compressed way down. But it just looks like it's slightly blurry, but really it could just be out of focus. I like the way you can see these little highlights and things on it, these little things you maybe wouldn't pick up on before. When it comes to the cutscenes, I really can't fault Nightdive. I think they've done a great job, and they've really pushed it as far as they can, as far as anyone can without having the source footage. Overall, I think the enhanced version, Nightdive have done what they can and pushed it as far as they could go without remastering it, and that probably isn't possible without the original footage. And a remake, I think, is just probably off the cards, because you'd have to just start everything from scratch, and probably no one has the time or budget to do that. And by remaking it, you're going to lose what's in the original game anyway, so it's kind of a double-edged sword there. I hope you found this video useful, and I would love to hear what you think of the enhancements. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you like them or don't like them. Thanks for watching.